I think hopefully they'll be taken on a journey that will allow them to feel and understand better that time period for sure, but also who this man is, who this family was, and maybe it'll spark some interest in learning more and certainly having greater empathy if you know greater empathy to those that had gone through this experience, but maybe even greater empathy for anybody that's suffering from inherited trauma, inherited pain,
Yeah.
which I think is probably most of us. I think most of us don't get to adulthood without having experienced some kind of challenges in our lives that those challenges stay with us. So hopefully most people will be able to relate to this play and feel uplifted. It is called Violins of Hope, not Violins of Pain. And that's also what we hope for, that they walk out feeling inspired and hopeful and more knowledgeable. At least that's what I
Yeah.
hope for. You, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that it will bring some young people, maybe particularly young musicians, to this story. It's not just another Holocaust story with darkness and despair. In fact, if anything, you know, in the world we're living in right now, where things seemed, with anti-Semitism rising and violence and things seeming irreparably broken, it's really important to remember that people went through a time like this before, and somehow this story speaks to the possibility that we can repair and restore ourselves and our lives, that the world doesn't stop at the point where we are right now, that human beings are capable of restoration, and that is going to happen. And I really hope that message comes through.
Hi, I'm Ronda Spinak. I'm one of the co-writers on The Violin Maker, which is having its American debut in April of 2025 at International City Theater.
I'm Lisa Rosenbaum with Ronda Spinak. We wrote the play The Violin Maker. It's based on the stories of the Violins of Hope, which is it's a play about a man's journey into his family's past in order to give voice to stringed instruments that survived the Holocaust, and create this beautiful collection of violins that are now touring all around the world and giving people hope.
And we hope you come out and see it. And we hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as we have. Thank you, Buell, for inviting us to share a little bit about our process and a little bit about The Violin Maker, which has been such a joy to write and to see it take the next step, which is be performed in theater.
My first question is, when did you hear about International CD Theater, and why did you want to work with them and their team for this American premiere?
I've heard about them. We're not that far in Los Angeles to Long Beach. It's a 35-40 minute drive. I mean, that might feel long for people who are listening who might live in smaller towns, but in Los Angeles, that's not that far. I knew of them because I have several people who are on the board of the Braid, which is a Jewish theater that amplifies Jewish stories here in town. And so I'd been hearing about the good work that they do. I had met Caryn Desai, who is extraordinary as an artistic director, and I even now watching her work as a director, my esteem and respect for her has just even grown even more. And then Lisa and I also have seen a play. We've seen a play from at ICT. I think they're a really solid theater in town, solid year after year after year, picking good material, finding good people to work with them, whether it be the acting or the different trades. And Caryn originally heard of the play, I think, through one of their board members who also isn't that how
I'm not sure how she heard about it.
that's how she heard. I
Yeah.
think one of their board members had mentioned the film version of it and that it had gone to Australia. And then she reached out, the subject matter, interested her. We sent her a film, which was the theatrical presentation that Lisa wrote a few years before that explored some of the same material in a beautiful way. And then we gave her the script that we had written for the international debut in Australia at the Bondi Pavilion Theatre. And she really liked it. And I think her own, we'd have to talk to her about this, but I think her own personal story somehow keys into the themes and the ideas explored in the play. And so she was really intrigued by the material. And after, kind of knowing kind of her solid approach and the fact that she does a lot of American and premieres, I think really kind of not convinced us, but we really felt there was a kindred spirit there. You can add to this, Lisa. I'm just finding my way through this, but there was a kindred spirit there. Like she got it. She got the material. She got what was needed. She has kind of the heart to be able to go deeply into the material.
Yeah.
And I think that was really important. It's a story that we feel a responsibility to the Weinstein family to share the story of how the creation of the Violins of Hope came to be.
Yeah. Nobody had ever dramatized it before. And its origins actually were that the Violins of Hope, which are this collection of Holocaust instruments, stringed instruments that survived and were repaired and restored by an Israeli violin maker. It's an incredible story, and they travel all around the world. They're played by school children and by some of the great orchestras and virtuosi of our time. This is an extraordinary story, but how this all came about was that somebody spoke to Noreen Green, somebody that was on our board at the Braid. By the way, I have to say, Ronda's way too humble. She is the artistic director of the Braid, which is a Jewish arts and theater, mostly theater company, which focuses on contemporary Jewish stories of the Jewish experience in America. They're little short pieces, and we have a whole style. And so this play grew out of what I wrote, which was in that style. So that's kind of where it began. Rhonda came to me and asked if I could dramatize this story about the Violins of Hope. As I said, nobody had, and that had its own history. We had, fortunately and unfortunately, COVID hit right after it was supposed to be performed live. And so it never was performed live as we had intended. And instead, Rhonda had the brilliant thought of pivoting to filming it. We started it on Zoom, didn't work because we had a whole quartet of live musicians. You can't, if anybody's ever sung and talked on Zoom before, you know that you can't do it. So we had to record the musicians. We had this quartet of beautiful musicians with the Los Angeles Jewish Symphony conducted by Noreen Green, who went on to curate all the music to this, which is interwoven through the whole thing. That was there, and then we had our actors talking just directly to the camera, all of them separate. But that was the bones of this thing, and as I said, it was filmed because of COVID, and as a result, it was seen all over the world. And then it was translated into Portuguese and Spanish and seen in 15 Latin American countries. And then the UN reached out. They have a global outreach program. All their diplomats and information officers see these programs, and they showed the film. We had Amnon and his wife Asi Weinstein, the luthier, and his wife came on at the very end for a Q&A kind of thing, which was amazing. But this theatrical piece presentation has now kind of made the rounds to all kinds of venues, and then somebody saw it and brought it to Australia, and there a producer wanted to see it as a fully staged play, and that's where I reached out to Ronda. We reached out to each other and said, let's do this together, because I knew the subject matter because this was my background. But Ronda has this incredible talent for knowing how to put a play together, a fully staged play together. And so we had a lot of fun working together and creating this play that ultimately went to Australia. And then, this iteration of it, which is about to be performed at ICT, is actually a real reworking after we have seen, we saw the original. We thought, we want to dig deeper. And so I think this form of the play, The Violin Maker, has a new name. It used to be Stories from the Violins of Hope, has really gotten to a lot of what we thought was important about not only the violin stories themselves. Each of these violins has an incredible story, but the violin maker and his relationship to them, and what that's all about.
I almost think you answered the next question, but I'll still ask it, is where did the original idea come from, and why did you two want to create this version of the Violin Maker for the audiences in America?
I guess I did answer it.
Yeah. I think what happened initially is one of my board members at the Braid was sitting next to the artistic director of the Los Angeles Jewish Symphony, and the violins were coming to Los Angeles. And by the end of that meeting, the board member came back to me and said she really wanted to create something that it wasn't just a symphony, not just, but all over town, symphonies and schools and whatnot would be playing the Violins of Hope, but there wasn't really a dramatic retelling of this story. And so that's when I reached out to Lisa, and I knew her background, having written this book, Day of Small Beginnings, which explores lots of different themes, and the Holocaust, and her husband's family were survivors. And so I knew she had a very strong and tender approach and view to the subject matter. I know her writing because she's also written for the Braid for 10 years. And she's a very lyrical, beautiful writer who's thoughtful and understands really the depth of emotion. And, why write something unless you're going to feel? And so, and the material inherently would allow a good writer to be able to take this material and share it in a way that would move people. The thing that's very interesting about this story is that most people think they know everything about the Holocaust, or people who know a lot about the Holocaust will say, oh, I know a lot about the Holocaust, but I didn't know this story. I didn't know that musicians played in ghettos and camps and underground and in the forest. And I didn't understand how the music really helped inspire and motivate and comfort people through the war. And I didn't know that there were surviving stringed instruments, and that some of those surviving stringed instruments had lost their owners to the Shoah. And yet these instruments are here as a testament to their owners.
And also, violins live for centuries. I mean, think of Stradivari and Guarneri violins. And so the idea that this man could take these violins, many of which were in really ruined condition, and restore them, bring their voices. Every violin has a different voice. Bring their voices back to the world, which are really the last voices of their owners, is really a powerful thing. And that's what he's done. So these violins will live on for generations, and people will hear them. And by hearing them as one of the violins of hope, and not just as any old violin, it's a constant reminder, not just of the horrors of the war, of the Holocaust, but also really of the beauty that human beings are capable of creating. And that, I think, is really his lasting legacy. It's something so beautiful. I just want to say that, one of the things that I did in researching this play was that I originally was given a whole batch of stories about each of these violins. And, they're just little clips of, the background. And I read them, and, I had to choose among them, and how I chose among them were, they were for their dramatic value, basically. But when I was finished, I realized I didn't have a play. I just had a lot of stories. And it wasn't until I spoke to Amnon himself, the violin maker himself, and heard his story and the way he spoke about violins and the way he spoke about his mission in creating the Violins of Hope and how that came about, that I realized this is the center of the play, and everything else sort of branches out from there. Because he had, his father was a luthier, and there's a very complicated relationship there, because his father was born in Lithuania. He came in 1936, I believe, so before the war, he and his wife. But they left behind their whole family, and their whole family died. And the impact that had on that father would carry on for the next generation. His silence about it impacted Amnon. And so that is a lot of what we talk about in this play. I mean, so many people have inherited pain. This is not just a Holocaust story. And how do you choose to respond to that? And the fact that this man, the arc of the story kind of is how this boy who wanted nothing to do with the Holocaust when he was after, his father's, reaction and what he saw at home, how does that person, that boy, become a man who not only embraces the story of his family and to talk about the Holocaust, but brings it to the whole world and makes that his mission. He stopped making new violins, and he devoted himself entirely to restoring these Holocaust era violins. So, I mean, it's an extraordinary story, and I just felt this needs to be told.
Is it easy or more difficult to create a play based on real history and real persons? Is there more stress, or especially that you were able to talk to some of the real people? Did the stories flow faster because of all the information you got?
Well, I think it's always more difficult when you are you have a responsibility when you're taking the bits of people's lives and dramatizing them, and I think it's important to get the spirit of the human and to the spirit of what they are, who they are as a person. And I think it's just a big responsibility. So I think there's that stress. I mean, on the other hand, you kind of know what the story is, and or part of the story. You never know the whole story
Mm.
unless you lived it with the person. So, so then you do take some poetic license, creating scenes and dialogue that didn't happen, but could have happened. So I think for me as a writer who has written material based on somebody's life, I feel that it's really important to be as true to who that person is, and you have to do a lot of research because perception changes based on who you're talking to, and that's also part of the joy and pleasure of figuring it out. It's a big
Yeah,
puzzle.
yeah, it is a big puzzle. But I mean, I think you have to be true not only to the characters, but also to history. And in this case, it's really important to get the facts straight about the history. Um, that, that's been very important to us, and we did a lot of research. As I did with my novel, I just think these things, you have to get those things right. But having said that, there is a Jewish tradition of writing what we call midrash, which is when the text, the Torah, doesn't just sort of has a piece of a story. There's been a long playful history of writing stories that explain the text, that fill it out, that find meaning in it. And that's kind of what you always have when you have a person's life. We had so many questions about, who was Amnon? I mean, I got to know Amnon a bit, but and he told me quite a bit about his relationship with his father, but you kind of sink down and wonder what happened that made him move in this direction or that direction, or how he reacted here and there in this play. That you have to fill in because, he's not going to say, he may not even know. And that's, I mean, that's the job of the playwright, to get to these deeper issues, human psychology and motivation. So, and that's the fun part too.
What are the main themes of the Violin Maker?
Oh, let's see, main themes. Well, I think it's about one of the main themes is confronting history, confronting your past, your family's past, and excising that. Sometimes there are things in our lives that keep us from reaching our potential, or from even fulfilling our dreams, or crossing a goal off of our list. And so for us, I believe that this story sheds light on one man's ability to finally confront and speak about things that have been silent in the family.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's also about that junction between inheriting something that's painful and terrible and choosing to make something fantastic about it. That's a choice. I mean, I know Holocaust survivors who wallow in their pain, and I know others who are incredibly joyful, who are thankful for having survived, and who have a completely different view of life. That's a choice. And so this man made a choice, and I think it's so interesting to watch how that happened. What did it take for him to move from one place to another? That's not just a Holocaust story, that's a very human story. Yeah, and yeah, the other thing, is that even though, to me, one of the greatest tragedies of the Holocaust is the incalculable loss of talent And there were so many exceptional people who were just simply silenced. And how many scientists, how many writers, how many musicians were lost? We only get a clue of it from the survivors. I mean, so many of them have been such high achievers. And so, for me, what's uplifting is to consider what we can create and what is beautiful in the world, and certainly the violins, the sound of the violins is beauty that should be. It's precious.
Do you want to talk about the actors and how they're bringing the Violin Maker alive?
We have some really. This is a really interesting collection of actors. They're already. It's so interesting to watch them approach this material. They start, just kind of feeling their way, and they kind of they're very fast and loose with the text, which makes us a little bit crazy because we suffered long and hard over every single word. And then they go sliding over it, kind of getting the idea, but not quite as we intended. But then slowly, they're starting to, grab hold of the words. They're beginning to see, they're digging down. Oh, this is why this is said. This is, and the interaction between them. The main actor, the fellow who's playing Amnon, he has a lot of text, remember? And he's really,
Bruce
this is Bruce
yeah.
Nozick. And
No,
he is marvelous. We're just watching him inhabit this role, as are all the other actors. And he is the only one who plays just one role, the role of the violin maker. But all the other actors, there are 7 actors, the other 6 play multiple roles, which means that they have to be different people. And they're all doing it in such interesting ways. We're very excited watching them find their way through the text. It's and they're finding the choreography, and we don't have the set. The set's not there yet, so they're just sort of marking it out. But it's a beautiful process seeing this thing come to life.
yeah. I've been very impressed by how facile these actors are in terms of changing characters, because as Lisa said, they all but the main lead play multiple characters. And the thing I really appreciate about this cast is it feels almost personal for them, that it's important for each of these actors to be playing these roles and giving their all to their parts. And that commitment really comes through even in these early phases of rehearsal. We just finished our first week. Actually, today it'll finish the first 5 days. And as Lisa said, every day it's leaps and bounds. And this is a play about language as much as it is about ideas, and also about music and story. The language is very, very beautiful. Lisa's a beautiful writer. She has
So is Rhonda.
Okay. It's a beautiful feel for language and imagery and emotion. And the actors, I feel, are really bringing their A game to the parts, all of the parts. And so, it'll be very interesting to open. I mean, I'm happy already. And just in the very beginning stages of rehearsal, because I really feel Caryn has done a beautiful job casting, and they're very committed. The actors as a cast are super committed.
Yeah, there's one other piece of this that we haven't talked about that much, which is Dr. Noreen Green, who worked with us from the very, very beginning in coming up with what piece of music would work where, because music is interwoven throughout the entire play. And as I said, the original had a quartet. One of the people playing in that quartet was actually playing one of the Violins of Hope. But we, in this production, she came with us to Australia for the first stage production with one violin, and that's what's going to happen here too. She will be playing live on stage, and there will be alive, hopefully. He's not going to be, a live musician, a violinist, who will be playing with her. And that adds a whole, another element to this play, to have live music. Just to add to that, it's a big variation. It's traditional klezmer music, Jewish folk music, Jewish liturgical music, but it's also classical music. We have Mendelssohn and Mozart all in there as well. So it's a big range, and it all, feeds into the story.
Tell us about the director. Just tell how she's building and helping this story being formed.
Caryn is a very skilled director. She is not someone who wings it. She comes to the first rehearsal prepared. And even though she has something in her mind, she also lets the actors explore. So and she's very soft-spoken. When she gives directions, she walks up on stage, she talks quietly to the actor. They have this beautiful interaction exchange, and then she gets off the stage, and the actor pretty much does what she has said. And this is after she's given them a little bit of latitude to kind of figure out where their instincts might take them, and then she helps hone. So it's very organic. I think Lisa earlier mentioned that it's been a very organic process, and I would concur. I also think that Caryn has an incredible feel for the material, and I think a personal connection as well, as a sense of responsibility to do the Weinstein family justice, to do the violins justice, and to really get it right. There's a lot of rights in art, but I think she has a very strong sense of what she wants, but a very gentle way of getting it. And that's a beautiful combination, in my opinion. Lisa, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, there's one other thing, and that is that I think it's somewhat unusual for a director to be as solicitous and inviting of the writers as she is. I mean, she has made us a part of the production of this play from the very beginning, and she has invited us, and she means it. It's not just, talk. She means it. She wants us to be there at the rehearsals and to have input. This is not, I've never seen it to this level, and it's just lovely. And the actors can ask us questions, factual questions. I mean, there are certain things, how to pronounce certain words, but they also, asking about a character's nature, and that we're there too. And we keep saying, we don't want to step on your play. This is your direction, and she keeps saying, no. She invites it. This makes a beautiful atmosphere, and it's really lovely. Been a lovely experience for us.
Mm-hmm. There have been a few moments where, as we're seeing, again, because this is a new draft, right? There's a lot that's in it that came from other drafts, but it's a new draft. Every time you change a word, every time you add a character, get rid of a character, change the scene, it changes the whole. And so we were in rehearsal, and I turned to Lisa. I said, there's something not quite right about the setup. There's something that we're missing something. And so I went back to the text, and I'm looking at it. And then they were rehearsing the first, 5 pages, 10 pages. So we got to hear it again. And then I figured out we needed to add 5 words, literally, because you couldn't get the context of the setup without adding the time frame, 10 years ago or something like that. And so Lisa and I decided what that would be, and then we turned to Caryn and said we need to add this in on page 2 or whatever it was. And Bruce was there. We gave it to him, and he incorporated it, and it felt right. Like it was the right thing. Now we're not going through and editing lots of stuff because they're getting off book. But when something that pivotal needed to be added in, or a word, we added in a word that also helped with context. That's very important. And so we're there to do that, and she's invited us in, and that only makes the production better by having these few little additions. So yeah, she's wonderful. I would work with her again, even though we're not done with the process, but I can see where it's going, you know.
To me, a very important question. Tell me what you want the audience to get out of the Violin Maker.
I think hopefully they'll be taken on a journey that will allow them to feel and understand better that time period for sure, but also who this man is, who this family was, and maybe it'll spark some interest in learning more, and certainly having greater empathy if you know, greater empathy to those that had gone through this experience, but maybe even greater empathy for anybody that's suffering from inherited trauma, inherited pain,
Yeah.
which I think is probably most of us. I think most of us don't get to adulthood without having experienced some kind of challenges in our lives, that those challenges stay with us. So hopefully most people will be able to relate to this play and feel uplifted. It is called Violins of Hope, not Violins of Pain. And that's also what we hope for, that they walk out feeling inspired and hopeful and more knowledgeable. At least that's what I hope for. You, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that it will bring some young people, maybe particularly young musicians, to this story. It's not just another Holocaust story with darkness and despair. In fact, you know, if anything, you know, in the world we're living in right now, where things seemed, you know, with anti-Semitism rising and violence and things seeming irreparably broken, it's really important to remember that people went through a time like this before, and somehow this story speaks to the possibility that we can repair and restore ourselves and our lives, that the world doesn't stop at the point where we are right now, that human beings are capable of restoration, and that is going to happen. And I really hope that message comes through.
I'm through in this question because I love theater, but I also think music is very important, and this production combines both. Why is theater and music so vital and good for the soul?
It takes us out of our daily lives, you know, all our monkey minds, our woes, and it raises us and makes us think about bigger things. Hopefully, things that that enrich us, that give our lives more meaning. Yeah, that's what we need. We're meaning-seeking creatures. So.
What she said.
Rhonda, as you mentioned about theater is magic. What magic do you want the viewers to take home from watching your play, The Violin Maker?
Well, I think what Lisa said is true. When you go to theater or you're at anything that's art, you are able to take a moment away from your life, right? Good art will take you out, will transform you, will allow you to step outside that list of things that you have to do and transforms you to be thinking about things differently. Having said that, it also can be instructive without being didactic, and it can inspire you to reach for you know, something more than your everyday life. You know, it sometimes is a roadmap for people to try different things or to have courage or to take a chance. When you have your heart open, it also can lead to conversations that you don't think you can do because you're vulnerable. And the person who maybe went with you to the theater is also vulnerable, and it allows us to talk and to connect. So I think that if anything, I hope that the Violin Maker will allow people to connect and be vulnerable and share and maybe inspire somebody to do good also in the world. Yeah. So the magic is that, I'm sorry, I'm going back to your question. The magic is totally taking people out of their everyday lives, and then people are able to do things and talk about things and move in a way that they weren't before they came into the theater. That is partly the magic, right? Taking us out, but allowing us to then think back in about our world in a different way.
Why must viewers, the theater community, attend the Violin Maker?
Written a really good play. It's solid and interesting. And I think it will give people something to think about and something to enjoy. Yeah, that's a good reason to go to the theater.
I also think that there's a lot to know about this subject. And people, like I said earlier on, I think that oftentimes people who know a lot about the Holocaust think they know everything. And this is a story that a lot of people just don't know. And so in the world of media and film and television and theater, to see a story that's kind of unique that you haven't seen before, I think carries the day. Yeah. And there's some really good, ethical questions about, like, when do you move on? When is the pain too great that you can't move on? And are there situations that you get put in that force you to move on? I'm thinking of, we've created this character who's German, who comes into this Israeli Jewish family and does stimulate and moves the story along. And, somebody from East Germany who comes in right after the wall came down. And what do they know about World War II? Which is really an interesting question. What were they taught? What do they believe? And what is history? I mean, there's some really interesting questions about belief. Like, when somebody doesn't believe something, even though the facts are there, how do you get people to believe? This is a theme that is woven through this story that has great application to our current lives. And I think that analogy won't be lost on people. So I think there will be some talk about that time, the current time, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, that question about belief and when do people believe and how do people believe is a very interesting question that's raised in the play, that the main character and others struggle with. And I think that'll be a very interesting point. Like if I was seeing the play, that would be something that I would be interested in discussing and thinking about further, which is a secondary theme, really.
I always ask this question because a theater production, only about 30% the ticket sales is covered. The rest is generous donations in kind. So why are theaters like the International City Theater and the Braid so important and needs the community help and support in all ways they can provide?
I think that's a really important question. I think art humanizes. I think art humanizes, and I can't imagine what our lives would be like without art. Would we have even less empathy than it appears that we're having today? Would we want to live in a society where everybody was for themselves and we weren't for anybody else, where there was no empathy for others? So I think when we support theater, when we support art institutions, we're actually supporting the best part of ourselves. We're saying, yes, we are humans, and we need to remember that we're humans. And so art helps us remember our humanity. It helps us to understand our neighbor, the person in the other city, the person who looks different from me, who may pray different than I do. It's a bridge builder. It allows us to be in society together in a way that is kind. So I think it's so important that arts are supported in the schools, arts are supported in our communities, arts are supported nationally, statewide. I think arts are what make us in part different from other species. I think that, if we go back to cavemen, they were creating art on the walls to understand their world and to probably entertain. There was music. So I think everybody should support the arts. Every single person should make a donation to whatever community arts organization or professional arts organization. And definitely should make donations to International City Theater, and definitely should make donations to the Braid. Those organizations doing good work need it. I know for sure our budget, about a third come from ticket sales, about a third come from individual donations, and a third come from grant and foundation gifts.
Actually, I should ask, are your future hopes? Like, would you want to see this play touring all around the country?
Absolutely. I'd love to see it tour around the country. I'd love to see it in New York. The Braid brought one show to New York a few years back called Not That Jewish. It played off Broadway at New World Stages. Fantastic experience, over 200 performances. I'd love for this. I mean, if you're talking aspirational, yes, we would love to go to off Broadway or Broadway. I would love to see it published. I would love to see it in schools, middle school, high school, community, 2-year colleges, universities. I'd love for it to be disseminated and be a staple in terms of Holocaust education. Yeah, absolutely. In part because it's sharing the story of the Holocaust in a different way. It's not the horrible book of horrible photographs. You know, it's an uplifting story as much as the Holocaust can be. You know, again, it's about repairing and restoring and giving voice to, you know,
The
survivors,
voiceless. Yeah.
voiceless. So, yeah, I'd love to see it everywhere.
When did you fall in love with theater, and why did you have to be part of the theater world?
Rhonda, go ahead.
Okay. Well, my family's originally from the Bronx, and my family moved here, and I grew up in Los Angeles, but because we had so much family still left in New York, we would go back. And I remember going back and seeing my first Broadway shows, Fiddler on the Roof, actually, and Sweet Chariot with Gwen Verdon. And they just, you know, flowed over me like some awareness that never would leave me, I guess is the best way to say it. And I always loved theater. My family ended up in Orange County, and I grew up on South Coast Repertory, which was in a strip mall in Costa Mesa. But the plays were wonderful. And so what started as just awe on Broadway with these first Broadway shows then became something that was transformative and moving and taught me lessons and instructed me about human character and made me feel something that great art makes you feel. And I actually didn't know that I had to be involved with theater. It was always something that I enjoyed going to, but I always enjoyed writing dialogue and that kind of thing in my writing, even in my fiction writing. And eventually what happened was I got a master's in professional writing with an emphasis in theater, and I read lots and lots of plays. And at that point, I think was when I really knew that I wanted to be. So, Lisa?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New York, so also. And I guess when you grow up in New York, you kind of can't avoid being surrounded by theater. And I mean, the kind of theater I particularly loved when I was a teenager and in my 20s was more experimental theater, things that really take you someplace else and another way of thinking about theater. But I have to say that, you know, I've written a novel, which means that you write something, it's in a book form, it's done. A film is in book form, is on screens, it's done. But what makes the theater so exciting, and we're really seeing this now as we're watching the actors feel their way in rehearsals, is that it's an opportunity, it's organic, and it's an opportunity to explore and rediscover the text with every single performance. And that is really exciting to see where, you know, you in your head write this text, or Rhonda and I in this case wrote this text together. We heard it, you know, in a certain way, but then to hear actors hit it a slightly different way, sometimes you're not so thrilled. Sometimes they find things that you didn't even know were there. They find humor in places you didn't know you had written. And also hearing audiences respond in places that you don't expect. This is such a wonderful process because you're not alone with it. There's a whole world that gets involved with a play. And in a way, it's, you know, it's kind of like the violin because it breathes and it's a living thing. It's, you know, a violin's made of wood. And it touches us. And I, you know, so that's where the theater kind of grips me.
When did you fall in love with writing, and when did it go from an interest to an obsession?
Lisa,
I
do you
can
want to
answer
take
that one. I started writing when I was a little kid, writing really, really bad poetry. And it got even worse as a teenager, of course, full of angst. But I think it's almost like, you know, as a kid, I used to hit a tennis ball against a wall. and just doing it over and over and over. You get better and better at it. And writing has always been the way that I think about the world. It's the way I've learned to think about the world. And so, it was a kind of a natural progression once I had a story to tell, or stories to tell, that I'd want them to go out into the world in one form or another.
Yeah, I don't know, writing obsession. I mean, like you, Lisa, interesting. We've never spoken about this.
Yeah.
I also wrote poetry, bad poetry, which I actually at the time thought was pretty good. I like the ideas in the poetry. I was always struggling with ideas and how people act in the world. I think writing is really challenging and really hard work. And if you choose a long form, that means you're just going to have a lot of work and it's going to be hard for a very long time. So I think, I was an avid journal writer from the time I was 13. And I think writing is a way of making sense of a world that oftentimes doesn't feel like it makes sense. And so for me, it's a way of working through my own feelings about myself, the people in my life, the people I love, and the world. And so I think for me, when a story or a idea just can't get resolved, then I think I take it to paper. And so I wouldn't say I'm obsessed. It's something that you kind of wish was easier, but it never is, and it always takes longer than you think it's going to take, So that's kind of where I am about writing. I like the end of it. I like the process where you turn it over to actors and you get to see what you've created, and then you get to noodle with it a little bit here and there because now it's a living thing away from you.
Yeah.
That part is fun.
Yeah, the last bit of editing is also where you get to, clean it up, but also see what you have, and that's also the most fun part.
Yeah.
And this goes into my next question. The theater experience, why is it such a unique format for both the audience and the actors?
Well, they get to speak to each other in the theater, audience and playwright and actors, and I mean there are so many people. It's three-dimensional chess. Between in our play, lighting is going to play a big part. The music, which is interwoven throughout, is going to be live, plays a big part. The staging, the set. And then, of course, the actors, all of whom, come with different backgrounds and different ideas about what the text means. And then you have an audience who may or may not be familiar with the subject or and reacts to it, in any particular audience is completely different than another. And that is always such an interesting process of just watching that interaction. It's beautiful.
Well said, Lisa. I totally concur. It's living, right? Every night is different. You think, oh, it's going to be the same. It's not. Your actors bring what they bring from the day to the evening. The audiences, a Saturday night group is different than a Sunday matinee group inherently, than a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And so all those variables cause, it's like chemistry, it's not always the same. It's different. So every night is really different. Why this particular performance is transformative, I don't know. Why did that particular night create something even more than what it usually does, or less? I don't know. It's the magic of theater, really, truly. and the magic of what happens when people come together and there's live performance and real people in the seats. You can't, I think the only thing that comes close is like sporting events where you have a group in a stadium and people on the field doing something. And I think that's why people love going to sporting events, because of the drama that's unfolding in front of your eyes. I just wish we had stadiums filled with audience members and we could do plays in stadiums. Imagine what that would be like. So
I thought of that when they built a SoFi Stadium. I think that would be the perfect location to do a large theater productions and all like that.
yeah, I love that. Aerial and animals and all kinds of things.
We can dream.
Hi, I'm Ronda Spinak. I'm one of the co-writers on The Violin Maker, which is having its American debut in April of 2025 at International City Theater.
I'm Lisa Rosenbaum with Ronda Spinak. We wrote the play, The Violin Maker. It's based on the stories of the Violins of Hope, which is it's a play about a man's journey into his family's past in order to give voice to stringed instruments that survived the Holocaust and create this beautiful collection of violins that are now touring all around the world and giving people hope. And we hope that you will come out and see the play.